Ordained at Yeshiva University, he holds a doctorate in mythology, depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, where he's taught myth, literature, and religious studies, Jung and Freud, and Kabbalah. He's been on the faculty of Yeshiva University, Columbia University, and USC's School of Social Work. His essays have appeared in national journals such as Psychological Perspectives, Ideas, and Shema, the books Illuminating Letters and King David's Journey into Wholeness, and publications such as the Huffington Post. A dynamic and engaging speaker, he's a frequent lecturer at the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles, as well as synagogues of all denominations throughout Southern California. Rabbi Gottlieb is the former director of Hillel at MIT and Princeton, and the co-founder of Claremont Lincoln University. Rav Mel has been a teacher of mine, someone I deeply admire, not only for his Torah knowledge and his passion, but his ability to be a mentor and really be mechazik others, that with great midot, humbly and with courage. And so I thought this topic was, there's nobody better to learn this from, someone who cares about social change, cares about activism, but also is someone who's deeply rooted in Torah learning and thought, who can think about as a Baal Mussar, as a Baal Midot, who can help us think about the connection between our own personal growth and repairing the world. So with that, Rav Mel, I'm sorry I took up 2 minutes of your hour, but it's a great honor to be with you. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Shmuley. It's a great honor to be with you and everybody this morning. We pray for a better year this coming year, and the pain goes away. And we're here in a very short period of time to just discuss Mussar and also how it's related to social action. That's what Reb Shmuley asked me to do. So I'll be weaving some of the ideas and also tell you about my background and my experiences with Mussar, how I came to learn it and where it is today. So as you probably know, Mussar was brought to the public sphere by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who lived in 1810 to 1883. He basically was disappointed with what he felt was a deadening in the yeshiva world, that they emphasized ritual at the expense of social interaction and midot ethics. So also was the time of the Enlightenment, and therefore he wanted to make Judaism more relevant to the outer world and with the values of holiness and character development. Some of the major books that he used was basically the Torah and Mishlei, Proverbs, Sad Yagon, Emunah V'Dayot, Ibn Pekud's Chovot Halvavot, and mainly the basic book is the Mesilat Yesharim, The Paths of the Just, by Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And we're going to look at just briefly in the text of Mesilat Yesharim. If we had more time, we could go through many different texts, or Yisrael itself. He wasn't a prolific writer, but what he wrote in a very pithy, terse way, if you look very carefully, you would get many ideas that are very resonant with modern psychology, basically. So I was exposed to Mussar in a relevant, in a live way by Rav Yitz Greenberg, who is the master Mussar articulator in the modern world. And many of his ideas that I will be sharing are based on his original conceptions and sharing with his students. But the first thing I want to say is I grew up on the Lower East Side of New York, and my grandfather was the Balkore in Tveretz Yerushalayim, MTJ, where Rav Moshe Feinstein was the Rosh Yeshiva and the Posek Hador, the decisive of the generation. And I sat 3 rows in front of him every Shabbat because my grandfather was the Balkore, and he wanted me also to train me to see a great tzaddik. And I say he was the first Mussar person I have ever met in terms of the midot and what he shone forth from his vessel. The first thing about Moshe was his discipline. Moshe was his discipline. During laning, during the reading of the Torah, in between each aliyah, he would polish off Mishnayot. He would never waste a moment's time, except if someone would come with a question, he would drop everything and be totally present with that person. I have so many memories. One time, a woman ran into the men's section on Shabbos morning. It was during the winter, and she said, "I have to speak to Rav Moshe." And the men wanted to throw her out of the synagogue. They thought maybe she was disturbed. And Rav Moshe ran over to her and said, "What is wrong?" And she told him that her husband was in the hospital dying, and he wanted to speak to Rav Moshe. So he just threw open his coat and ran out with her. This is just an indication of what Mussar is about, that it's bein adam liyadam, it's between human beings, treating people b'tzelem Elokim. That is the essential part of the Torah. As we know from the Gemara, it says, what's the most important verse in the Torah? Rabbi Kiva says, you should love your neighbor as yourself. But Ben Azai says, there's a verse even greater than that, and that is that every human being is created with Tzelem Elokim in the image of God. So Rav Moshe embodied that, and his Rebbitzin as well was a Musarnik, I'd say, because I went to yeshiva to study in yeshiva for 2 years after I graduated college, and I came back with a beard and a black hat, and I knocked on the door. My grandfather stayed at his home on Shabbos after my grandmother died. I knocked on the door, and she immediately extended her hand to shake my hand because she saw how frumped I got. She thought I was like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai just coming out of the cave that would burn all the field up. And she wanted to bring me down to reality that the Torah came to create a mensch. The more human you are, the more Jewish you are. And that's the way they were. Have so many stories that I could tell about Rav Moshe, but he was the first model that made me think about what the essence of Judaism is. And so basically, when I'm going to skip a lot and go to the time of coming to Yeshiva University. At Yeshiva University, I was exposed to wonderful teachers, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, many people who made Judaism alive. And they taught, Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg taught the basic essence of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's teachings. He taught intellectual history of Western Europe and intellectual history of America. They really didn't utilize him properly in terms of his Jewish knowledge. And this was part of the problem at Yeshiva that we'll talk about in a few moments. But he basically taught the idea, his teachings that were very prominent with Rabbi Yisrael. The main teaching that I loved about it is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's teaching that rather than worrying about another person's spiritual level and your own physical needs, worry about another person's spiritual level and your own another person's physical needs and your own spiritual level. And as I said, Rabbi Yisrael didn't write that much, but it was the stories about living out this dictum that made him so powerful. He was an itinerant preacher, and he was a character development person. And he, through his stories, you got what he was about. For example, it's just several little stories. One time he had a shtibel, he had a mincha. During mincha time, all his congregants used to run to the window, shout out of the window, people, come in and help us make a minyan. One time he got in front of the bima, he said, people, why is it during mincha time, I always see you running to the window, shouting out of the window, people, come in and daven with us. Why is it I never see you going to the window and saying, poor people, come share a meal with us? Another story, famous story, is he used to bring his yeshiva bachrim on Shabbos to a gvir, to a wealthy person's home for a meal. And one day when they were there, the woman who schlepped in a pitcher of water to wash their hands, the students noticed that Rabbi Yisrael only washed his hands to his knuckles rather than to his wrist. So one of the alert students said to him, Rebbe, doesn't the Shulchan Aruch say that you have to wash your hands to your wrist? And Rabbi Yisrael said back to him, that's true, but not at the expense of the woman, the water carrier, will have to schlep in another heavy basket of water. In other words, it's the menschlichkeit that is the essence of Judaism. Plus, he was amazing in terms of his social action. When there was a cholera epidemic in Kovna, he during Yom Kippur, he went to the Bima and he said he wants everyone to take wine and challah and make a blessing and eat, because he was afraid that if people were going to be fasting, they would be prone to the plague, just as today we have with the COVID, and that was prohibited. He also was very, very careful with poor people in terms of social action. He when there was the poorhouse was not clean enough, he went to sleep in it himself. The board members of the synagogue were offended, were enraged. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta sleeping in the poor people. He said he's not going to leave until they clean it up. Of course they did. So he had this character development issue, and also that led him to social action. So some of his sayings are amazing in terms of the depth of understanding the human psyche. For example, he says that a poor man can be as gluttonous with a piece of bread as a rich man with a feast. He says a man is asur is free in fantasy but limited in reality. In Or Yisrael, he speaks very clearly about human nature, the way he saw it. He said every human being is filled with keha, a dark part, which we call the unconscious, and a me'ira, and a light part. And the dark part is much more powerful than the light part. The key is, how do we gain access to the dark part, which controls us, our instincts, even unconsciously, without even being aware of it. And he created a methodology very similar to Sigmund Freud. We'll soon see that we have to use our reason, the mirror, the rational part of the mind, to place it, to focus on the dark parts, to take a look at all the underlying midot that bring us away from a holy way of being, and work on that consistently. We'll see if you read it in Or Yisrael. I can't read it all to you today, but he said we shouldn't take pauses away from it, because then it keeps repeating itself, what Freud called repetition compulsion. And he said that on Shabbat, we should definitely take time to sit and work on midot. And he created many types of methodologies to make that possible. But what was important for him is that he said that although reason is the beginning to conquer this, it has to be brought down to the emotional level. We have to have Torah-Rooted. We have to really feel it. We have to really be powerfully attuned to that in order for us to be successful with it. So he developed a lot of methodologies to do that. One was he encouraged his students to study Mussar, the text. He had them keep journals, diaries on specific midot. Many of them were taken from the earlier texts where he, for example, patience, humility, all texts that they had to study on a daily basis and really encounter them in terms of how they control them. And he made them go to see the root of the issue, not just a superficial take on it, but to trace it to the root. It's very similar to what we read in Bamidbar in Parsha Naso, with the chapter on the copper serpents, when the Jewish people sinned and God released copper serpents, and Moshe asked God to stop the plague, and God said to Moshe that you should create a pole and put a copper serpent on the pole and let the people look at the pole and they will be healed. And the rabbis point out that you have to trace what bit you is what can heal you. You have to get to the root of what keeps repeating in your psyche in order for you to be able to engage with it and not repress it and project it, but integrate it and overcome it. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was very similar to what Freud talked about in terms of the unconscious and the conscious, in terms of the reality principle and the pleasure principle, because both Freud and Rabbi Yisrael Salanter felt that the reason why we operate with our instincts in a way that we're not aware of is basically to reduce stress. That's what he called the pleasure principle. But indeed, it really increases stress when we don't take into account the reality of our actions when we're acting on our principles, on our instincts. So Freud talked about the reality principle, and Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said the same thing, that we have to take a look not only at our own behaviors, but how our behaviors impact upon people and what results from that. So we spoke about Chachmat Olam, that we have to study the psychology of people. And every human being is capable of kol midah v'hipucho, of every character trait and its opposite. So with ourselves, we can be strict, but toward other people, we have to honor them and give them kavod, because just because the Torah says that taiva and kavod, we have to stray from, the Torah also says that we have to honor people. Who is honored? He who honors other people. So in terms of yourself, you can be strict, but with other people, you have to honor them. You have to be capable of every character trait. So in order for you to do that, you also have to experience honor yourself, so you know another person feels about being honored. So you have to get to know the psychology of people, the needs of people, in order to fulfill them. And he created these Mussar groups, these in Shtiblach, where people would work together on different midot every few weeks, and they would grow, and they had different types of methodologies. One was hispilus, and that is that there was a Mussar shmuz. Someone would come about the mashgiach and speak to the people from a Torah portion that reached the heart, and the people would bring the reason that they're attending to with that midah, with that trait, and bring it to their emotions. To the emotions would be awakened, because he writes in his writing that we have a guf and a neshama, a body and a soul, but both can be reached with Torah, with the depth of Torah brought to its deepest level. I experienced this in Israel when I studied there for 2 years after yeshiva, and during the time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there was a famous Musar named Rabbi Ben Zion Brook, who was famous for his Mussar shmuz at that time, and everyone would line up to be able to go listen to him. And so I woke up very early that day, and the line was already very large, but I managed to get in to hear the Mussar shmuz. It was a mincha time on right before Yom Kippur, and he would give this amazing type of sing song, the shmuz. He would say, "Do di livani lo haro abashoshanim." I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me like a lily amongst the roses. God doesn't want your automobiles. God doesn't want your materialism. God just wants an open heart from every human being. He would go over this about 3, 4, 5 times, and human beings who were sitting in there, everyone there was teary-eyed and hitting their chests, and felt the fact that we're here to create good in the world, olam chesed yibana, that we have that capacity as long as we become more clear and more conscious in our life. During the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the other thing, he had this hitbodedut. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said that we have to sit by ourselves and meditate and get clear about our actions and our motivations. In the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there was the korban, the sacrifice of the besamim, the spices, 11 spices before the prayer service. The Gemara says, unless you engage with that meditation before your prayers cannot be as effective. So today we don't have that, but you can imagine what happened with besamim. You see the smoke going up, and you get connected to that, and you let go of your thoughts. You get connected to what you're thinking, and you let it go, and you try to get to the kavanah, to the connection that you're feeling at that moment with the Eibishter, with the Holy One. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter brought that ability to meditate, the importance of that, to let the chatter of the mind go and come back to your soul, to your neshama, which is deeper than the mind that you sometimes operate from, the superficial mind. So he would have different methodologies to get people to grow in that way. We'll soon see what we did in the modern world relating to that. So he was also an itinerant preacher. He went from Salant to Vilna to Kovna to Germany to Paris. He went to Germany because he was ill. He spread Torah to college students, to libraries. He translated the Gemara into the vernacular. He was a person who was always on the move, always on the go. And his students loved him, and he had different students that developed different types of Mussar. One type of Mussar was the Navardic Mussar, and that was a very strict type of Mussar. You could read the novel, the Yeshiva by Chaim Grada. He speaks about the ascetic part of that Mussar movement. Then there was the Slobodka school of Mussar, which spoke about Godliness, Romamut Hadam, how great human beings are. If you just treat them properly, if you love them, you accept them. It's kind of like humanistic psychology, and that was easier to taste, especially for the modern world, because some people ask the question, why didn't Mussar spread like the Hasidim, like Hasidus spread? Hasidus was over 50% of the Jews in Eastern Europe after about a decade or two, whereas Mussar remained a small movement. And that is because the Baal Shem Tov talked about the love and for every human being and how great every person is, whereas the Mussar movement emphasized how inadequate we are and how much we have to work to really get to where we need to be. They used to, one of the great Mussarniks was Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler from Gateshead Yeshiva, an amazing teacher. And he writes in his Sefer Michtav Me'Eliyahu, one of the reasons why there are these split temperaments in the world. He speaks about the Gemara in Eruvin 13, page 13, where you have the famous discussion between Hillel and Shammai. That question is, for 2.5 years, they argued whether it was better for the world to have been created or better for the world not to have been created. And Bet Hillel said, of course, the world should have been created. God created it. Bet Shammai said, no, the world should not have been created because there's such evil in the world. And they argued for 2.5 years. And most people, when I ask who did the Rabbanim agree with, and most people say Hillel, but to our surprise, they agreed with Bet Shammai that human beings have to be educated in character. There's a lot of evil within the self and within the world, and therefore that they have to check their actions very carefully. That's the way to perfect the world. So the argument was not about whether the world should have been created or not. Of course it should have been created, but the argument was about how should the world be perfected. So the Mussar movement took the view of Shammai that we have to be aware of our inner psyche and transform it to the place, use the energy of the instincts in a positive way. The only way to do that is not to repress these instincts or be ashamed of them, because then you can't engage with them, but you have to be able to be aware that every human being is made up of a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, as Jung said, a shadow. We have a shadow within us, and that's why the world was created that way, for a purpose, to be able to engage with the shadow and transform it and create a unity in the world. If the world was just light, we would be in a state of ennui, of complacency, not really work to steig, to grow and to make this world the world that it could be. So I just take a pause for one moment to catch your breath, to remember where we are. Okay, so for 2.5 years, so we said that human beings can become perfected either through the methodology of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's Mussar movement, or through examples of people whom they meet in the world who embody that. So let me just tell you a few things about when I was in yeshiva in Israel, for example. The first year I was there, I was in a yeshiva called Mussar Yerushalayim, and there were several Rosh Yeshivas there, Noach Weinberg, Rav Nata Schiller, Rav Aaron Feldman, and they, Rav Noach Weinberg taught us Mesilas Yesharim, taught us Mussar every day in the yeshiva. He was famous for a thing called the 48 Ways. He had a special way to teach Mesilas Yesharim. But also we engaged and we met such holy people through our experience there. And the second year I went to Rav Kook's yeshiva, America as a Rav, and studied the writings of Rav Kook. And Rav Kook also had an amazing friend, Rav Aryeh Levine. He was the rabbi of the prisoners and the people who had diseases. He would visit them in the prisons and the lepers. And he was a short man, and he had a shul in the Meir Sharm area. And one day he was walking through the streets. He had difficulty getting people for a mincha time. He saw this teenager, this tall teenager, who was standing on the side, and he asked him if he could perhaps come help make a minyan. And the young man said to him, "Rabbi, don't you see, I don't even wear a kippah. Why would I want to come to daven?" And Rabbi Aryeh Levine said to him, "I'm a short man. I can't see what's on your head, but I see you have a big heart, a big heart. The Torah comes to reach the heart and bring people to the very one they're meant to be by integrating the psyche with the Tzelem Elokim within them." So so I went to yeshiva in Israel. When I came back from yeshiva in Israel, I was very much immersed in the teachings of the Mussar movement, which I originally learned from Rabbi Yitzchak Greenberg, but got deep in Israel. And when I came back, I was a dormitory counselor and at Yeshiva University. And every night I invited people into my room to study Mussar. We studied Michtav Eliyahu and Ali Shur and other Mussar Sfarim because we weren't satisfied with just studying Gemara the whole day and night. So we decided to create this Mussar Shtibel within the yeshiva. Then after a while, we felt we weren't doing enough. We wanted to really be active Mussarniks in the world. So we decided to go down to the Lower East Side and connect with the Educational Alliance and see if we could volunteer to help the elderly there. And some of us decided to actually move down to the Lower East Side and live there. So we lived as Mussarniks for 2 years at that particular time in the rabbinical program. Plus, we created a lot of Mussar works. We created a thing called the Mussar Anthology, which I don't know if you could see on the screen, but it's a series of essays that was edited by Hillel Goldberg. And we have in there essays by Rabbi Yechiel Per, who was the teacher of Alan Marinas, who really has created an organized Mussar movement in the United States now. But this book was very beautiful. It's out of print now, but I highly recommend it. And we decided that we wanted to change the rabbinical program at Yeshiva University because it was created to succeed. 1% of the people succeed in becoming great Talmudic scholars, but the rest of the people who may have loved philosophy or psychology or other parts of Torah that had to do were more Mussar-like, were looked down upon. We're not the aristocracy of the learned. So I once mentioned it to a Rosh Yeshiva at YU to tell him, why can't we change the curriculum? Because I said only 1% succeeds in this. He said, and that's why we make it this way. The curriculum is for the elite 1%. Even if the other people don't succeed, we have to have the 1% of Torah scholars in every generation. So we created it that way. So I, as a result of studying Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and his teachings, one of his teachings, he says that everyone should study Choshen Mishpat, because to become ordained at Yeshiva University, you had to master Yeridea, which laws have to do with kashrut, with shchita, with areas in that way, whereas the laws of Choshen Mishpat has to do with social laws, with monetary laws, etc. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter writes that that everyone should L'kboa shiur lelimud Choshen Mishpat, should set aside time to study Choshen Mishpat. And he says the Baal Habayis should always ask the question, Eich yiyah hadin shayach ka'et? How is this? How are these laws relevant for our time now? Ki ha'eskim nishtanu v'zeh kemat hatchilas idiyat halimud b'choshen mishpat leida lahavin eichem shayachin ka'et. That all the Baal Habayim want to know how the Shulchan Aruch is relevant to the times today. And the Baal Habayis lidrosh v'lachkor etzel tov se'atorah eich l'kayim et asher yikra lifneim l'kol ha'pachos b'bchinas hakalas ish l'fi matzav yirato, and how we in our generation can make it relevant in contemporary terms so that we do what's proper for our generation. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter already probably would have changed the smicha program at YU, and but he was not. We were not able to do so. But I'm just giving you an illustration of how Mussar affected us in terms of social action, of even wanting to change the smicha program. Now, let me tell you other things that happened in terms of Mussar at Yeshiva University. At this time in the late 60s and early 70s, the Soviet Jewry movement was beginning to flourish. There was a man named Jacob Birnbaum who came from England and came to the dormitories of all the rabbinical schools and told us, Yishrai, you have to go out and protest and make sure the Jews in the Soviet Union can be liberated. So we took this seriously, and we began to create protests. Eddie, if you want to show some of the protests of the Soviet Jewry movement. We started off, the first protest ever was downtown on Lower East Side with Leonard Farbstein, where we, I don't see it on the screen yet.
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay, well, it seems like we can't see it on the screen, but there's a picture there also, if it'll come up, where we protested at the Soviet embassy on Tisha B'Av, and then we also decided to go to the Federation of Jewish Philanthropies to try to have them give more money to Soviet Jewry and to Jewish education, because they were giving their money solely to hospitals, etc. We planned this movement for a year, and we finally entered the building of the Federation, and we took over the building, and 80 of us came up and took over the building and closed down the building, the floor of Federation, and took over the telephones. Whoever called the Federation, we said that Federation is closed today because they don't give enough money to Jewish education and to Soviet Jewry. We knew we would get arrested. We called the New York Times about it. We wanted to get arrested. We wanted to publicly shame the Federation because they weren't responding for a year to all our pleas to help Soviet Jewry. So we did get arrested. We knew we'd be free after a few hours because many of the protesters were children of Federation leaders. But lo and behold, at that point in time, Federation did change their policies and gave a lot of money to Soviet Jewry and to Jewish education. This was a result of social protest a la the Mussar movement that really inspired us to go out and do the proper thing. There are also pictures that I don't see on the screen, but pictures of protesting the Vietnam War, protesting Biafra. There was a major debate at Yeshiva University, which was pretty conservative at the time, as to whether we were permitted to go out and protest, because their point of view was that Limud Torah is prime, and you can't waste any time, even to social protest. Other people can do that, but people who are Talmidei Chachamim, who are studying Torah, should not waste their time. So we protested that, and there was a big meeting in Lamport Auditorium. The whole school, and this never was done, was there, and the two big Rosh Yeshiva gave shiurim as to why we were permitted to do it. One Rosh Yeshiva said it was because of the principle of Ava. Ava means that you shouldn't do anything to raise the ire, the anger of the goyim toward you. So for your safety, you should go out and help the city. The other Rosh Yeshiva said something even more profound. He said, the reason why we should go out to do it is because the Torah is shalom. Its paths are the paths of peace, and all its pathways lead to harmony. And we have to go out and create peace in the world. So this was all created by the instinct of Mussar to protest and to go out into the world. There was also arguments about in the yeshiva about how to, that since the point of being a Jewish nation is Kadoshim Tiyu, to be a holy people, that there was an argument about how to achieve that. We know in chapter 19 in Kadoshim Tiyu, Rashi says, Purushim Tiyu, we should separate ourselves from the world, and that's the way to make ourselves holy, and people will look at us and say, what a beautiful people, and they'll want to worship God and create a better world. The Nachmanides says that there's another way to do that, and that by going out in the world, don't be a glutton or just studying Torah and not really going out. Use the light of Torah to transform the world. That's how you bring holiness into the world. So there was different points of view in the yeshiva. Yitz Greenberg was a very progressive thinker, and he really held that we needed to go out into the world and make the leaders of the Jewish people, the religious, the clergy, when they go out and protest, it's a Kiddush Hashem. And here we have some pictures to show. I'm sorry. You want to go back to the first and second pictures? Okay, so this was the first protest for Soviet Jewry in about 1969. This is Congressman Leonard Feinstein. This is me there at that time. Go ahead to the next picture. So this is on Tisha B'Av in front of the Soviet embassy. Someone snapped a picture of me there, and they sent it to me, some professional photographer, but you see I have my tefillin on. This was hundreds of people went in front of the Soviet mission to protest what was going on. We were told initially, as opposed to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's way, is that we should not do this because that there's a Skolerna Rebbe and the Hasidim were smuggling out some Jews from the Soviet Union, and if we do that, the Soviet Union would get angry and make it harsher for them. We didn't listen to them because we knew that these were just a few people who were getting out, and we needed to protest. And this movement gained in stature, and you want to continue with it. And it also brought together clergy leaders, not only from the Orthodox community, but for the first time, we met other people from other movements who were also interested in creating an ethical world and helping people who were suffering. So that was, I don't know if you could move that over to the next screen. Okay, then this is more modern. This is social action once more for immigration, which is a Mussar base that we have to make sure, we'll soon read inside, that we have to help the people who are suffering, and it's part of the Mussar. Could you go to the next slide? This is also social action based on interfaith work and how all cultures, we have to realize everyone is created in the image of God, and we have to make sure that we're all together and accept difference. And that's why the Tselem Elokim idea is even superior to the V'ahavta Recha Kamocha, because V'ahavta Recha Kamocha assumes that a person is like this. Love your neighbor who is like you. But Tselem Elokim says that every human being, even those who are different than us, has to be respected and loved as created in the image of God. So all nations are part of God's creation, and we have to reach out and come together and create a stronger religious impulse in the world to elevate the world. So this is at LMU. This is by CLU, Claremont Lincoln University, a school that I helped to build, where each religion studies other people's religions and gets master's degrees and goes out to be more sophisticated leaders because of knowledge of the other traditions, rather than some projections of stereotyping of the other because we don't know them. You want to shift it a little bit more? This is also interfaith work based on Mussar, from my perspective, based on working together with Sikhs and with Christians and with Muslims. This was an award that we got for all the work that we did over the years. I'm a member of Jewish Muslim groups who meet regularly, and we try to support each other when there's anti-Semitism, when there's Islamophobia, and it's a movement that has the impulse of Mussar to it, that we have to treat every human being sensitively, and if someone is suffering, we have to help them, and we have to work for justice in the world. You can move along to the next one. This is this was a Holocaust memorial on a Crystal Nacht. This is Alexi Smith, the head of the Catholic mission in Los Angeles, and it was taking place at Loyola Marymount University, which is a Jesuit school, which my school is connected to in terms of trying to create social justice and in every kind of way. You want to turn one more. This is also social justice work for Jewish-Palestinian dialogue. This is Roots Shorashim. This is Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Ali Abu Awad, two great, one Palestinian, one Jewish leaders who live on the West Bank. Ali Abu Awad has a great movement of nonviolence on the West Bank, and you might know Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, who started Roots. Shorashim means we both have roots in the ground. The only way to create peace is to share it, and not to say this land is mine and not yours. So I worked with them, brought them to the United States several times, and we do fundraising for them. We have to get involved with social action to create peace in the world. I think Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would be a great advocate for that. Okay, so I think that let's look at, bring up the text of the Mesilat Yesharim. I see we're running late. I just want to show just text, if you could bring it up. If not, I'll just read it. Just two passages that are very essential to what we're talking about. Page 1, you see it's blocked, but it says, Yesod HaChasidut v'shoresh avodah ha'tmima hi sheyitbarer v'yit'ametz etzel adam ma chavato b'olamo v'lemat tzarech sheyasim mabato u'mebgamato b'chol asher omer kol yimei chayav. The foundation of saintliness and the root of the perfection and the service of God lies in the human beings coming to see clearly and to recognize as a truth the nature of his or her duty in this world and the end towards which he should direct his vision and her aspiration and all of the labors, all the days of his life. So Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who is one of the greatest foundations of Mussar, starts off by saying, Yesod HaChasidut v'shoresh ha'avodah, the foundation of piety and the root of service. Notice the first letters of each of those words, Yud, Hey, Vav, comma, Hey. You see the name of God, Yud, K, Vav, K. So the Kabbalists who look at the alphabet with Atbash, where the first letter of the alphabet is equal to the last letter of the alphabet, the second letter of the alphabet can be transmuted to the second letter at the end of the alphabet. So the Yud, which is the 10th letter of the alphabet, the 10th letter from the end of the alphabet is Mem. So you substitute the Mem for the Yud, and the 5th letter from the beginning of the alphabet is Hey. The 5th letter from the end of the alphabet is Tzadik. So you substitute the Tzadik for the Hey. So you come out with the word, instead of Yud K Vav K, you come out with the word mitzvah. The Vav and the Hey remain the same at the end. But it's through the mitzvah that we become connected to God. This is the Jewish way of spirituality. And the word mitzvah itself doesn't just mean just a good deed. It means, according to the Baal Shem Tov, actually a joining. Through the deed, you connect to God. Every time we do a deed, we have the kavanah. We say, Shem Yichud Kudsha Barichu Shchinte. With this deed, I'm having the kavanah to create unity in the world between the feminine and the masculine in the heavenly world that's disparate, and bring down the unification to this world. Whenever we do a good deed, it's not just for the sake I'm doing a good deed, but it's also a connection to God. So he starts off with Yud K Vav K with mitzvah. That is so, and everyone has Yitbarer v'Yitametz. Notice how he explains it twice. Yitbarer, he has to make it clear in his mind, v'Yitametz, and make it true to his soul, to his feelings. That what is my purpose in the world? What is my uniqueness? Why am I brought here? What do I have to give? And it doesn't mean that you have to do service all the time. Everyone is unique and different. Some people go out and do Gemilah Chasidim service all the time. Some people reach God and create the world through Torah, through study. And some people do it through prayer, through meditation, through spontaneity, through passion. Every way can be a way, says the Kutzker, as long as you make it a way. The key is to make it a way, to work at it. And that's what the Mussar movement did every day. So in our school, the Academy for Jewish Religion, California, what I did was to start a Mussar group every Sunday evening. Every Sunday evening, 8 students of our 60 students, there were 6 groups, would get together to study a Midah for 2 weeks. There would be a leader of the group, and I would supervise the leaders after the sessions, and each one would work. And during the week, I would send out a letter. They had to respond to the letter of one of the Midot, working on it in their journals. And little by little, we became a Mussar community, and we integrate into the school of spirituality and a Mussar reality that's necessary for us to come to great. Since late, I'll just show you. Go down to page 3 and 4, Eddie, and this is the trait of humility. Of humility. This is a beautiful thing to look at in Mesilat Yesharim. It's chapter 22 on Avat. The 2 things I wanted to point out in here. He says, I'll just do it in English. Okay, in Hebrew it says, that he says that humility is dependent not only on deeds, but on thoughts, upon thought and deed. Before a person can conduct himself in the way of humility, he or she must first be humble in thought. So this is a very powerful idea, how we have to really work on our psyches in order for us to be whole as a person. And the next page, he says, if you go up 1 page, he says, the factor that is responsible more than any other for a person's coming himself to feel self-important and proud is wisdom. This is so because wisdom is a superior quality of the person himself, a function of the most honored faculty, intelligence. But he says that this quality of gaiva, because you think you're smart, is what takes you away from humility. We have to be careful about that as educators, as leaders, that we shouldn't be caught away with our wisdom and feel so self-important. We should learn to be humble. And the last part of it is on the bottom. He says, one who is wealthy, this is Mussar here, one who is wealthy may rejoice in his lot, but at the same time, he must help those in need. If one is strong, he must assist the weak and rescue the oppressed. This is what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter taught about social action. We are responsible for the oppressed. We are all one. As you know, V'ahavta Sager is the mitzvah that's mentioned more than any time in the Torah. So we have to love the oppressed and it's estranged, and love the estranged in ourselves. I'll just end with this. It says that you should love your neighbor as yourself. I heard in the name of Rav Nachman of Bratslav, the term Reah is also the letters Resh, Ayin. Love the evil within yourself. Love the shadow within yourself. If you don't get integrated with it, you'll just project it because you're so ashamed of it. You'll see it in others, and you'll develop hatred toward them. The only way to find wholeness is to use your mind and your feeling to examine yourself and realize that we're all polymorphous, perverse. We all have darkness and light, and that's okay. That's to be integrated and not to be projected. So this is just a tip-tipa of what I would want to say to you about Mussar, that it's an amazing movement, and but we shouldn't. Today, I think it should be integrated with Hasidus as well and Kabbalah. These are all soulful movements in Judaism that need to be studied and practiced and become one with. There are two writings that, by the way, we didn't get to. You want to just put up on your screen, we'll answer it, we'll open it up for questions, but on the screen, you should at least take a look at this. The stories of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and his sayings, the sayings of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. You'll see the depth of his brilliance. That's not the sheet there, but he says, okay, I think you could read that. You could read these two articles, which contains all these things. One is, if you take the screen away for one moment, I don't know if you could put this up, but one is, firstly, the best book on Mussar is Dov Katz's Tnuat HaMussar. Tnuat HaMussar. It's about 6 volumes. It's an amazing, very readable, and it gives you all the parts of the Mussar movement. I wrote 2 articles that are summaries of the Mussar movement. One was in Tradition in 1975 called Israel Salanter and Therapeutic Values. I translated his works into English. And also the second one is Mussar, a Jewish psychoethical model for our time, which is found in the Institute for Jewish Ideas and Ideals that Mark Angel edits. It was in the autumn of 2010. Anyway, we could.
Rav Mel, can I jump in with a first question here?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, great. So a lot of what is inspiring about religious life is the purity of it. You're davening, it's pure. You're learning, it's pure. You're with your chavrusa, it's very pure. But when you go out into the world of tikkun olam, of social activism, it's very impure. It's very dirty. It's very messy. You have to have allies who you don't always agree with. And one's integrity can be challenged. How do we think about bridging the gap between this place where you're kind of in devekut, if you will, you're intellectually clear, you're spiritually attuned, and going out to a place that is so dirty and so messy and imperfect? How do we think about bringing one's full self and one's total midot into that kind of environment?
Okay, that's the Mussar work that you have to do. You can't go out, if you're thinking they're dirty, that's already an issue. You have to be a person of light. You have to transform them with your light. And you, of all people, Shmuley, have such light and strength. Your example is transforming the world, whether you know it or not. But and I'm glad you raised that, because unless we have to understand that we have to first get into our own judgments. And remember Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's major teaching: rather than worry about another person's spiritual level, your own physical needs, worry about their own physical needs, your own spiritual level. What do you have to give to them? You can transform them with your light. Either your light is going to become dimmed with their darkness, or they're going to be brought up to your light. So the more you strengthen yourself with your light, the more you do the davening in the morning and the learning your Mussar and having a community that's like with you and supporting you, you'll have greater strength to go out and do it. It's hard what you're doing. It's lo tov hayot al mivad. You're all alone, but you're strengthened by do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. You're a tzaddik because it says a tzaddik has to be betoch ha'ir. It says by the story of Abraham and Sodom and Gomorrah. They define the tzaddikim, people who are betoch ha'ir. You're betoch ha'ir. You'll notice there's a small yud by the tzaddikim there, because those who are tzaddik from pelts, who are just tzaddik for themselves and to go out and risk it, are not true tzaddikim. You can't stand idly by, and you're doing the Torah's way. So if you wrap the Torah around yourself when you go out, I mean, image-wise, you create an image, you go out and you bring friends with you. Eventually, little by little, it'll help. As it says in Pirkei Avos, you're not there to complete the work, neither you're free to desist from beginning it. So you're creating a movement. You're the Mussarnik right today. Okay. Anybody else have a question? And I apologize for running and running through this.
No, please, we're gonna go a few minutes past if we have questions. Don't be shy, please. Reb David is trying to say something, I think. Oh, not yet. Okay.
Here, what you had spoken at the beginning that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was responding to I think the way I understood at the time, sort of the dryness and the of Talmud Torah. So as a teacher of rabbinic texts, and I'm not a community. I'm an educator. I actually teach. I teach at the other AJR, the one on this coast.
I know your name. I know your name from Torah Chaim. Yeah.
How do you suggest? Can it go the other way? Can the Mussar be invested and injected into the so-called dry Talmud Torah? How can that help us?
So he was really responding not so much to the dry Talmud Torah, but more to the hergel, more to the habitual communal dimension, that people weren't really growing spiritually. They weren't confronting themselves. They were just, it was like a social thing. That's the way many synagogues are today. People don't go to be transformed spiritually. They go to hang out. So in the yeshivas too, Torah, deep Torah, you could imprint with not only Mussar, but there's so many beautiful mefarshim on every parsha, that's so deep, it's so deep. And when you transmit it, it will have an impact on people. But people have different temperaments. There are certain mathematicians and scientists, they love every detail of the Shakli. Then there are the more poetic types, the artistic types who want to get to the spiritual dimensions. The problem is, if the educational system is only relegated to one type, and that was the system that he experienced in Europe, in those days, and that I experienced at YU for a while. That's why a place like Chovevei started. That they were scared. They were, part of it, I think, and Yitz Greenberg speaks about this, was the Holocaust mentality, the paranoia that the outer world is evil and we have to just go withdraw and be amongst ourselves. But then they lost the energy that comes from it, becomes enterprised. Everyone agrees with everyone. The challenge that Israel came and challenged them. That's why he was opposed in the beginning. They were afraid that it would become like a cult and people would stop studying Torah Lishma. They'd get into their own introspective thing. But in actuality, as you see from his writings, he went and what his actions, he went out in the world and he transformed it. Amazing stories that I didn't even tell you. So many of the stories. We put it on the sheet, but it couldn't get up on the screen. I'm sorry but if you look at my article, you'll see translations of many of his stories and his sayings that are very deep and very psychological, very subtle. He says a poor man with a piece of bread can be as gluttonous as a wealthy man with a feast, or just so many things that are very, very deep.
Thank you. Rabbi Mel, we have a question. Sorry if I butcher your name, from Francesca. I hope I said that correct. Is there a time or a situation when it is acceptable to draw attention to someone's darkness as opposed to their godliness?
Okay, that's a great question. So it says in chapter 19 in Kedoshim to you, it says, "Lo tisna lechicha belevecha," you should not hate your neighbor in your heart. "Hochiach tochiach amitecha," you should surely rebuke your neighbor. V'yafrecha kamocha, unless you speak directly, hochiach tochiach, to another person about with an I statement about the way you're feeling, you can't create progress and harmony eventually. It should be direct. It should be making sure that you firstly rebuke yourself, make sure you're not projecting, and amitecha, make sure you look at the person as your friend. So if you deny and do not say what you're feeling, firstly, you're not being honest with yourself, and it'll come out in another way. The other person will also sense it. You know, Reb Dessler speaks about the difference between flattery and honesty. He says many people, because they're afraid of reactions, they flatter people, but the other people know it's not honest and they don't take it in seriously. But if you're honest with a person with an I statement, rather than saying you are this, which makes them defensive, you say I, and then you get into active listening with them. You say, wow, it sounds like you're feeling this because of this. Then both of you can begin to see each other and get beyond who is right and who is wrong and the defensiveness. So I would say, yes, if you see darkness in the other person, express first get in touch with yourself, make sure it's not something you're dealing with, and then express it in a loving way. You know, I'm feeling dash because of dash. That is a way to begin the dialogue, and don't give up. I always say patience, persistence, and prayer, and eventually, and have faith in the light that you're bringing and that you're seeing in every human being, even though they're darkened, there must be some light. And if not, it's a lesson to you to learn something about them or to teach something that you are brought to this trial for. It says every trial of Hashem Nisa, and every experience that you have is a learning experience, is to lift you up. And if it's a difficult, challenging one, you look at it as a learning experience, what can I learn from this? That will be a major contribution as well. I don't know if I answer your question.
Let's take one more question.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Do we have one more? Okay, Rav Mel, I've got one last one.
Yes.
So both in Aristotelian virtue ethics as well as in Mussar, you are inward focused. But activism at its core, I think, is empathy based. It is outward focused. It's a transcendence of self.
Right.
How do we transcend the self through empathy while at the same time hold a spiritual consciousness of self-development? Right? Do we just trust that the Mussar works as we're engaged in that Buberian I and thou, seeing the others and ends in themselves? Or do we remain self-focused while we're cultivating that empathy?
Okay, that's a great question. And as I say, any way can be a way as long as you make it a way. There's not one methodology. Some people have an instinct of they need a place of separateness for them to really get conscious and clear and do the work. And other people need to relate to people, and that's what turns them on energetically. Certainly empathy, certainly anivut is the highest madrega that we could reach, and that is that I didn't get a chance to speak about this, but Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Moshe anav mikol adam. I translated he's the most open of all people, and the reason for that was that he experienced everything. He was abandoned as a child. He lived in the house of Pharaoh. He lived in an urban environment. He went out in the desert. He was even a murderer. So you're right, and he saw the narrow line of impulsivity. How here by the grace of God go I, and therefore he can empathize with every human being, that I'm no better than he or she, and that I'm capable of everything, you know, and so is everyone. So we have to be able to learn to empathize, that can only come from a humility, but to look at yourself first and see that, hey, I'm as crazy as everybody else. And how can we both be crazy together? You know, the Nachman story going under the table, so with a rooster. So, but I prefer the relational kind of thing because that's my temperament. I prefer, when I came to LA and I was into Mussar, a friend of mine, I started going to Happy Me. He said, Mel, you're not a Muslimnik, you're a chassid, you know, because I love to dance and to sing. And God gives you a special quality that you have to to define for yourself. What is your tendency? What is your gift? Don't try to be who you're not. And if you can't tolerate the darkness, so step away from it, examine it, and maybe go to other places where you can be effective. Not everyone can do everything. And there's no one total answer for that. Look at this whole notion of Kedoshim Tiyu. There are two models for that. There are two models also for the Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben Yehuda. One is Yosef ran away from evil when Potiphar came after him. Supposedly he dropped it. That's the way to perfect the world. Whereas Yehuda went out into the world with Tamar. When he entered her, he transformed her, the darkness into light. He became transformed through it. Any way can be a way as long as you make it a way. The key is have a practice and keep moving, have a chavruta, have a community that's so strengthening. And so we daven together with a minyan, and you know, if it's a minyan with kavanah, it's hoo-ha, it's so great. Remember the Baal Shem Tov, it says this shul, he can't go in. He said, there are too many words in it. They said, what do you mean? The words aren't entering, they're taking up all the space. But if we prepare and we daven and we learn, we'll get there. And you evolve. It's beautiful the way you question yourself. It shows your humility, because when everyone else will look at you, they'll say, oh my God, if he's questioning, who am I? You know, but that's a great model. That you're always sending out questions and queries, etc. But on the other hand, you're going out on the line. You're with the immigrants. You're with the homeless, etc. I didn't even tell the other stuff that we did. You know, I was on the homeless task force in Santa Monica. We created showers and lockers for them and taught them how to go to interviews. There's so much to do. It's overwhelming. But if each of us just does his or her little thing, we're moving in the right direction. And it's a pleasure to be here. I have to apologize that in 45 minutes, it was impossible for me to cover all that I want. I'm just running, and I'm sure I'll look over my notes and say I have another 3 hours. But I hope it didn't go too fast, or that you heard it, and that's it. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Mel. We appreciate you so much. I've had the honor to be able to construct this and put this all together and work with you. My great mentor, Rabbi Shmuley, who I'm blessed to be mentored under, has said nothing but great things about you. And today is a proven fact of that. I want to thank everybody who's watching online through our social medias, and everybody who joined us today. We appreciate you. This programming was brought together by Uriel Tzedek in partnership with Arizona Jews for Justice. I want to remind everybody that next Monday, January 21st, we're going to be having Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein speak on Torah and police brutality. Please make sure to join us. That's going to be 1 p.m. Eastern Central. I want to wish everybody a great day, a great start to your week. Lots and lots of strength, of gevurah, lots and lots of compassion, rachamim, to keep with us, and strength, compassion, patience, some savlanut, to make sure that we hold that dear in our hearts. I appreciate everybody who's on this call. I look forward to seeing you again.
Great. Just a closing bracha. You know, when Rav Adin Steinsaltz Zatzal was asked, what's the most important value? What's the most important value? And we could, so many brilliant answers you can give, you know, justice, compassion, love. And his answer was consistency. So I give us the bracha of consistency where it makes sense, building on what Rav Mel closed with there, that make yourself a path and stick to it. Whether it's social activism, whether it's our Mussar and how we bridge those to continue each day, to continue to grow and repair the world together. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much, Rav Mel and everyone.
Thank you.